Hey everybody, this is Refresh, and Saturday, April 28th, I went to Draft Weekend at Emerald Knights Comics and Games, and I played in the Dominaria Draft. The draft was your standard 3-match draft, and in Pack 1, I opened a Steel Leaf Champion, as well as a foil Verdant Force, as well as Grun the Lonely King. And so I was stuck wanting to take one of those three, and whatever I passed, somebody on my left was going to take it, and so I figured that in Pack 2 I wouldn't be past much green, so I was very conscious of cutting off my second color as I was moving forward in Pack 1, and so that ended up being red off the Sheevan Fire that I got, and then I was cutting that off, and I ended up drafting all of these cards. I also thought that I might be able to go black, but I ended up not ending up in black, except for a little splash off the Eldritch Reborn, which was Pack 1, Pick 3, I think. And then red ended up being my second main color, so I just stuck with it. And then in Pack 2, Jaya Ballard got passed to me, so it was my Pack 2, Pick 2. And so I took her because I was already in red, even though I knew that she wasn't exactly the most amazing card. Overall, I was pretty pleased with what I drafted. I kind of wished that Pack 1 wasn't so tilted in favor of green, so I could have gotten better green stuff, but the draft went pretty well. I actually got some decent value because the Steel Leaf Champion and the Jaya Ballard are relatively valuable cards. So this was my final deck. I originally had the Rampaging Cyclops in instead of one of these Keldon Raiders because I wasn't sure that I'd be able to make the double reds, but after a little bit of playing, I realized that with 2 Songs of Freyalise and the Skittering Surveyor, I had plenty of ways of getting the fixing that I need in order to play it. And so in came the other Keldon Raider, and in came Jaya Ballard, who I originally had out for another land altogether. So this is a 16 land deck, and again, I do this because I have 4 pieces of ramp and 3 pieces of fixing, and I thought that was enough to get there. As you can see, Icy Manipulator of course made it, all the really powerful spells made it. I had a lot of 2-drops, and I included a Broken Bond in the main deck because I figured with this format there's going to be enough targets with artifacts and sagas all over the place. The goal of the deck is to go wide or hit hard. And so the go wide strategy is helped by the Saplingland Migration here and the Spore Swarm here. And in general, the creature curve is a bit on the lower side. As you can see, it's mostly 3-drops and 4-drops. And the idea is that I will establish a board presence, and then hopefully the Song of Freyalise will either help me get into that board presence, or we'll be able to take advantage of that board presence to pump everything and make it indestructible, vigilance, and trample for quite a bit of damage. And that's the basic plan of the deck. There's not a lot of removal. I have a Sheevan Fire and an Ancient Animus, and then some pump in Gift of Growth. And hopefully with that and Icy Manipulator, I should be able to get in. I have the Mammoth Spider for some defense against flyers, and that's kind of my top end, as well as the Eldritch Reborn, which I splashed in with just a single swamp, with the hopes of being able to take advantage of its high card value. Since my opponent loses a creature or planeswalker the first turn, then they have to discard a card, and then I get to take a creature or planeswalker from any graveyard into the battlefield. Jaya Ballard herself is not like a high impact card. She's mostly in the deck because I saw that I can rummage with her, discarding up to 3 cards and then drawing that many cards. So in the late game, she's just good to get past all the lands and try to draw it into more action. And so that was the deck. In game 1, I was up against an Azorius sort of flyers value deck, and the very first game I flooded out pretty early, and my opponent managed to land not 1, not 2, but 3 Sphinxes, and I just kind of died pretty quickly once they were all landed. My opponent actually got quite a bit of value by bouncing his own History of Benalia, and so he got a lot of knights over the course of that game, and there was really not much I could do about it. In game 2, my opponent and I actually had a pretty decent race going, but my opponent actually managed to play enough tricks and removal to take out my creatures, and eventually surprised me with Wrath Caption, and then, dropping in various sagas out of the blue, thanks to his ability to give all historic cards flash, and the value off of the history of Benalia and getting multiple knights each turn, and then also just being able to play tricks like that and also get a kicked Academy Drake up in the sky kind of wrecked me, and so I lost that one. I did take a mulligan to 5, and so I started at quite a disadvantage, and so I was pretty impressed by my performance, being able to last as long as I did before my opponent finished me off. My second match was up against an Orzhov deck, and in the first game I took a mulligan to 6. That deck hit me very hard before I was able to stabilize with a bunch of Spore Swarms and Sapling Migrations. At one point I also kicked a Crozon Druid to get me a whole bunch of life. The Spore Swarm and the Sapling Migration and a handful of other little creatures that I played also benefited a lot from Song of Freyalise. So I actually managed to stack 2 Songs of Freyalise together, and those two, when they fire it off, gave me 2 really hard-hitting turns. So even though my opponent had me down at 2, when I stabilized and cracked back on the second Song of Freyalise, I was smashing in for lethal, even though he was at 17. And so the Song of Freyalise was definitely a big winner in that game. In the second game, my opponent started with a mulligan to 6, and he kept the risky hand, and then he got mana screwed for the rest of the game. So I just went wide and swung in turn after turn, and there wasn't too much that my opponent could do about it. And that was the end of match 2, so at the end of that I was 1-1. In my third match, I was up against a Boros deck, and the very first game I managed to win off the back of going wide with a Song of Freyalise again. I had managed to get my opponent down to a fairly low life that my going wide with a Song of Freyalise about to explode my creatures into Vigilance Tramplers made my opponent see the writing on the wall, and he conceded. And that was even despite a mulligan to 6. In the second game, my opponent mulliganed to 6, and it was a bit closer of a game. I managed to go wide, but my opponent managed to Voltron up one of his creatures that got additional +2/+2 and trample for each aura equipment on it, and that was hitting me really hard. So despite getting the Song of Freyalise again and being able to hit my opponent really hard, and my Icy Manipulator slowing down his biggest threat, he was able to kick a Skizzik and then give it flying with the Pegasus Courser and finish me off. And so we were 1-1 at the end of that one. Our last game was a slugfest. I started with a mulligan to 6, and I was a bit on the back foot the entire time. We did trade a bit, and my opponent did prevail in combat with a little bit of removal to take out some of my creatures at inconvenient times. And then I think the attrition favored my opponent, especially me being a card down, and he won. And that was the end of that. So I went 1-2 at the end of the night. My performance wasn't great, but I did get to do some bonkers things with Song of Freyalise, and I never got to cast Jaya Ballard because I actually never had her in my hand, so I didn't get to see if she was going to be any good or not. But regardless of how I performed, everybody who attended the pre-release got a Zahid, Gem of the Lamp, with an alternate art promo, and that was kind of cool. That's a nice little bonus for playing. And then Emerald Knights had a bunch of leftover promos from Open House, so they offered one to me as well in a random lottery amongst the remaining players. So I picked a Llanowar Elf, which is a nice pretty little card that may end up in one of my cubes. So I thought it was a pretty good night with some promos, a couple of decent value picks, and a few games of Magic that I enjoyed in a format that I really enjoy. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. How did your draft weekends go? Let me know in the comments below. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.